Welcome back to Raw Green. Francesco and Emma here. Today, let's talk about something slightly uncomfortable. Is the green jobs boom over?
No way near. Green jobs are growing about 8% year on year since 2021, and demand is growing twice as fast as supply.
So let's find out what's going on and where these opportunities are. We're joined by Martin Kettlewell, founder of Pure Fuel, a recruitment firm focused on sustainability jobs. Martin, great to have you back.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Martin, 2 years ago, sustainability teams were expanding aggressively and salaries were inflating fast. But in 2025, we've seen everything. We're pulling back from green commitments, restructuring, we've seen AI, companies and countries withdrawing from global agreements and regulation. So as a recruiter on the front line of these changes, was 2025 the end of an era for sustainability jobs, or is it resetting into something new?
I think it's the latter. The market did shift, but I don't think it changed dramatically forever. I think there are a few things that happened in 2025 that caused a bit of market disruption and probably what caused a bit of pain for a few people that were on the job market or found themselves looking. I think, you can narrow it down to a few issues. One of them being, America got a new president in the White House. He came in like a bit of a bulldozer. I think, but away from the rhetoric, his anti-ESG rhetoric, I think, looking at things like tariffs that cause sort of market disruption, Ukraine, what happened in Iran. I think what we saw was a lot of people wanting to pause, and pausing for jobs and pausing when you're looking is basically just completely stopping. And what we want to see is calmness, because that creates investment and market growth. Although that seems to be the obvious answer, I think the more obvious answer is EU Omnibus, where the EU pulled back on sort of quite significant reporting regulations and delayed it to 2027, 2028. What we had was 2024, as you were saying 2 years ago, this boom, investments, people coming in, growing teams, in-house teams were growing, consultancies were getting more projects on to look at reporting, CSRD. People invested a lot of money and time into EU regulations. And then, come 2025, they may as well have just said they're never going to happen, because delaying things to 2027, 2028, when you're a hiring manager or a medium-sized company, you might as well just say this is never happening, or we'll just think about it later. And what we saw was, a few teams being let go, consultancies pulling back on projects, and again that kind of stagnation of growth. So I think that was the big riff of 2025. That has caused this. Is the market completely over? I mean, I completely disagree with that, and I'm looking forward to talking about why that isn't the case today.
Yeah.
We can talk about a lot of positives, but I think having that kind of understanding of that base layer of there was some significant market shifts in 2025, which we were all just not counting on coming into the new year in 2024. Everyone was ready for a sustainability boom. Reporting was going out, teams were massive, consultancies couldn't hire enough people, and so it caused a bit of a ripple.
So in the last chat, you focused very much on two things: the growth of sustainability green jobs and also the evolution of them as well. So let's talk about growth and the innovation. What job titles or profiles have you seen come into the market new, and which ones perhaps have clearly slowed down or disappeared?
Well, I think what we're seeing a lot more of in the market, I wouldn't necessarily focus so much on job titles, because job titles can be a bit misleading. Sustainability consultant, sustainability director, ESG analyst. So I think it's more important to look at where the market specifically is shifting, where the hot areas, rather than job titles. I don't think people are trying to reinvent the wheel on job titles, but it's more about, okay, what are the deliverables? What are we trying to achieve in the market? What shifts are we seeing? And the shifts we're definitely seeing, and I know this leans into you guys and, your love of AI and talking about AI, but, mission critical
Oh,
infrastructure,
we love that.
data centers,
Yeah.
something that is being heavily invested in. There's an AI race, and, that has huge environmental and sustainability implications. Data centers, it's not just about financing them, but where to build them, how to build them, how to power them, how to build them sustainably, how do they use less water? And, I'm not necessarily saying that's a new job title or a new market. What I am saying is that we're seeing a huge increase in demand for that, and a big shift of, so you have people
That's
that
way
work,
more technical, Martin.
Yeah.
That is way more on the tech spectrum of side than
it's very
an
specific.
ESG report. Yeah.
I think it's very specific, and I think it leads into what I was wanting to talk about, I suppose, later on, but I can talk about it earlier now, is that belief in assets and things you can touch.
Yes.
2024, we were talking about reports, data,
Yes.
analytics, how do we utilize that to create wealth generation, or to use it to reduce carbon footprints. Now it seems people are much more happier with things that they can touch and feel, and so buildings, infrastructure, renewable energy, wind farms, solar farms, that seems to be what people are really pushing towards, and where the market's shifting to. And it's good, every investment is good news. If you were in corporate reporting before, and now the market shift all the way to renewables, that's not the end of the world because you just worked in corporate reporting. Because where there's investment, there's always jobs. And if in sustainability, and I'll tell this all the time, data does come into it in some aspect. It's just maybe a shift away from how a corporation's looking at scope 3 data, to more, okay, what's the impact of this particular building, this particular piece of infrastructure? If we generate it, how's that gonna work? So you're always forward planning, and data and analytics and reporting come into it. But I think that's the biggest shift we've seen in the market, is that want and need for actual physical things, that that's what people want to see where their money's invested. I put X amount in, this is what I get out. Let's build a wind farm onshore. They've cut red tape. Labour government have cut red tape for wind farms, onshore wind farms. Let's go for that. And I think, that's where the big job generations are coming at the moment.
Let me jump in 1 second on this. Like in summary, okay? Then it connects to the second part of what Emma was saying, which is the growth part. So in short, capital and jobs keep flowing to things that looks like industrial competitiveness, right? So climate techs, power, grids, storage, EV supply chains, efficiency, electrification, nuclear also. So those are framed as security, resilience, manufacturing. Those are doing good. Meanwhile, though, on the other side, anything that is framed as climate science, ESG, reporting, disclosure, anything that is DEI adjacent language, corporate commitments, becomes a political football and get cut faster because it's easy to label as optional or as ideological. So you have the hardware stuff that are doing good. And I have some stats on that from the IEA, from the International Energy Agency, that jobs in the energy transitions are just kaboom. They're going skyrocketing. Really good. Like they're outpacing supply. There's going to be a demographic crunch into that. But on the other side, everything that, again, it is DEI adjacent, kadoosh, it is going the other way around. Kadoosh is a very technical term, by the way. So
I think this is a really interesting perspective you've got there, actually, Francesco, because I see it differently. Again, though, is we've gone from scenario planning to solution building. I think that's a huge positivity. All the stuff that you've just talked about, Martin, those jobs and the development, innovation that's happening in those spaces, is exactly what we need to actually solve the problem of climate change. Not more data.
I have to agree with Emma.
Reports.
I'm sorry, Francesco. I have to agree with Emma on this one. I think.
So, which part?
I just think it's easy. I think you're falling into a bit of a trap putting ESG in with DE&I. DE&I has been politicized, and I think and that's fine. Well, that's a whole other podcast. But I wouldn't say corporate reporting, ESG reporting even falls into the DE&I side of things. I think the reason it was dropped, not because it was easy to, is because they didn't need to do it anymore. With the EU Omnibus and the CSRD, they are going to need to soon. And again, with this infrastructure and building projects, everyone still needs to report on carbon. That those regulations are still there. They're just not as bolstered, and they don't need as much investment. And so, and we're talking about it, that shift to, there's just a slight shift to solutions building rather than, constantly just reporting on last year, reporting on what happened last year, et cetera, et cetera. It's looking much more forward. So I don't want to...
Martin, that is the nature itself of that whole area of intervention that has been framed wrong from day one, from T0, okay? Has been framed as a compliance exercise, right? Something that gets choked down the throats of companies in terms of time, costs, resources, and everything, rather than being an exercise that said, hey, this is a risk assessment for you. These are your mitigation strategy that can save your company's ass in the next 5 to 10 years. No, you have millions of regulations, many of them overlapping on top of each other, that basically says any company, I don't imagine corporation, but SMEs, where am I going to crack my head? Find me a corner where I can bump my head against it, because that is too expensive. It's too complicated for me. Without the financial returns, we are explaining the financial returns into investing in something like that.
I mean, we'd all be a lot better off if governments had much better communications teams.
That is very true.
On the head there, really. You framed it perfectly. This is how you can avoid risk in the future, rather than you must do this to you must do this to comply with us.
Accounting.
Yeah,
that was accounting.
Yeah, I completely get that. It's funny. It actually brings on, I was speaking to someone the other day. I didn't really know him. It was at just in a social event, and he runs a small construction company. And, he asked me what I did, and, I explained it, and he went, oh, right, okay. And I was like, here we go. And it turns out, that he was really annoyed because he had to pay £500 to get an assessment because there was some birds nesting on a construction site. And he was really annoyed about that. And I didn't have the time to tell him the long-term implications that if they don't do that, then, you let other companies run rampant, and we'll just end up building on, wildlife, and, there's no balance. So I think you're so right there with that communications. He's a perfect example of not being communicated to. There's 4 birds nesting there. I've got to pay £500 and I hate this. And I don't like ESG. Whereas, communicated properly, whether it would go in one end out the other is a different story, but communicated properly is saying, listen, we have to think about not these 4, we have to think about 1,000 birds across this different area. If we can conserve them, it's better off in the long run. Everyone's happy, nature conservation, biodiversity, etc., etc. And you know what? It's a small price to pay.
We've had this with newts, great crested newts. Everyone's like, it's a fucking newt. But they don't understand that the presence of newts is a keystone species, which indicates, of course, a really rich biodiverse area. And therefore, it's really just an indicator of what is right or proper or can or can't be built there. They think it really is just about somebody's love of a specific kind of newt. Anyway, but you have just touched on an interesting thing. What Francesco was saying there was framing the debate around how big corporates and SMEs perceive the same thing differently, or at least utilize the same tools differently.
Yeah.
Do you see that, Martin, in terms of how they're approaching recruitment, building skills into their organizations, and ultimately taking on some of these challenges proactively?
Yeah, for sure. I think when you talk about the difference in corporations and SMEs, you're talking about a vast difference in resources, and I think corporations have more of an opportunity to pay lip service to sustainability and ESG, where they can hire 2-3 people and then kind of do some reports, few programs, some social work, etc., and then plaster it on their website that they're really great. And I think SMEs, the ones that invest and look at bringing these people in, probably care more than the corporations because it's a massive investment for them. And I actually am seeing a trend of more SMEs bringing people on board, their first sustainability. We worked with a small construction business. They brought their first sustainability hire in. They were so excited. And that stemmed, and that need for someone in sustainability, I know we're contradicting ourselves here, stemmed from their need to report, by regulations. So I think regulations are important and they do help because there's a real life example there. Someone didn't have a job. A company needs to report, so they hire someone to do it. Perfect. It wasn't a massive expense for them. They're really excited. He's going to do loads of work and they're going to bring in more work from sustainability because of it. It's a great thing. But, I don't know if I've answered the question there specifically, but I do think, we are seeing a shift of more people investing in that sustainability on the smaller scale. It has a knock-on effect from those need for regulations. They bring someone in and then that person then creates more work, more opportunity, and more programs, and, companies are better off for it. So the quicker they catch on, the better.
What about geographies? You guys works also in Dubai. And there are, besides the weather, there are lots of differences between, for example, UK, Europe, and Dubai.
Yeah.
It keeps coming up in conversations, all that glitter and allure of money. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it true lots of people are moving there?
I think Dubai is a really interesting topic, especially for me. I work on both areas. So, Dubai, for some reason, has become a very polarizing place. Leave the UK, everything's ruined here, move to Dubai where everything's fine, and everyone wants to move there. And I'd like to have a more balanced approach and a more balanced view to it. I think Dubai offers some amazing opportunities, like weather, like tax-free living. But then also the UK offers something incredible.
Not little, by the way.
They're
not little opportunities.
The UK has a much more diverse work environment. You can look at financial, built environment, consultancy, insurance, banking, small, medium. There's loads of some incredible startups in Oxford, in Cambridge that are hiring people, climate tech. It's like a buzz of activity in the UK for people. Dubai is a much smaller market. And people that do go there are competing with the rest of the world. I think people forget that as well.
I do agree with you. The UK, especially for climate tech, for what we see, it has, I think, the world's best ecosystem, especially for early stage climate techs. I've never seen anything like that. The way it is structured, the whole EIS system, it is really well done. Then the issues comes after at the, let's say, later stages, but it is true. But that allure of money, Martin, you read even on the BBC now, they start to talk about people relocating from the UK to Dubai because the level, especially again the level of taxation, it has reached levels incredibly high. Maybe there are some things though that are underestimated. They say, okay, I'm very happy, I'm packing my bag, going to Dubai, and then they arrive there and it wasn't all that glitter and money.
Yeah. Well, I think there's the sort of two ways to look at it. So Dubai is undoubtedly you're going to earn probably more money there. Real life example, someone just started for me in another company. He got, he was on 110k in the UK, moved to Dubai. He got 110k equivalent in dirhams. He's basically doubled his salary overnight, and that is the top line allure, and it's incredible. But, and there's a big caveat with this, he's a young single person. Dubai is an expensive place, and without things like free schooling, free healthcare, rental prices are quite high, and so you kind of need to earn a significant amount. And if someone's like say on 110k with 2 kids in the UK and then goes over to Dubai and has 110k equivalent of dirhams with 2 children, the school fees eat up all that person's spare money. I don't want to say all that person's spare money. And they probably would struggle. they would struggle in a place like the Middle East. So, I think the top line is a really nice sell. Tax-free, you could earn X. This is what will be your take home. Get rid of that. You look at your paycheck at the end of the month, get rid of all the, NI and all those things, and you just take home the gross pay. That is, undeniably an enticing thing. But, you've got to look at your personal situation. You've also got to understand that the Dubai market is very competitive and it's a lot smaller. You've got a small city. It's not as mature as the UK or Europe with regards to things like finance, investments, startups, things like that. And you're competing with a lot more people. That tax-free living isn't just enticing for people in the UK. There's a lot of people around the world that think the same, and you have to be wary of that. Again, another big kudos for the UK. Our time to hire in the UK is probably anywhere between 1 and 2 months maximum. From talking to me to talking to the client, a month and a half. The Middle East is very different. You're talking more 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And in that time, someone could come that's already in Dubai and gazump you because you're not there. So there's lots more variables involved. So yes, I'm a big advocate of the Middle East. I do a lot of work there. I think it's a great opportunity. But when I'm talking to candidates, I have these kind of conversations on the first call with them. What's your personal situation? Do you have children?
Mm-hmm.
Would you be moving out with them? Are you going to move out with them in 1 stage, 2 stages? Where are you going to live? Do you know if you can afford where you're going to live? The Dubai property market is like this. It's
also a smaller geography, so a smaller
small,
region,
and it's seasonal. If you move there in November, the rents will be 50,000 dirhams more a year than if you move there in summer, because summer's hot. It's an interesting place, but there's loads and loads of opportunity there, but there's some caveats with it. And, I think the only reason I'm sort of being a bit cautious around Dubai is because I think it's inflated a lot on a lot of other podcasts. It's seen as this like bastion.
Oh, yeah. You've seen YouTubers selling it like it is land of tomorrow, which is obviously an attractive place to go. Obviously, that fiscal regime, who wouldn't be interested in having that kind of advantage? But then you have the downsides. You need the school, you need the rentals that are obviously more expensive. However, there is also the energy discussion, but let's not talk about that for the moment. Let's talk about money instead, but more on a broader scale. Okay, let's say that now you agree with me that there is a reprioritization of ESG in many companies.
Yes,
and salaries in this space are still holding up. Okay, or are we seeing a normalization, if not even a compression, compared to a couple of years ago?
Well, if I was to pick my own brain and my own experience, I would have said a compression. I thought that a lot of people flooded the markets in 2025, 2022, 2024. Salaries were a bit inflated as more people were coming through skill set wise. However, without using my own opinion, I did look at the data, and salaries have increased in the sustainability world. Not by huge amounts in 2025, but they are going up in line with kind of other trends and inflation. So I would say that they are holding strong. And considering that, we've already talked about it, that last year probably wasn't the best year, the fact that salaries are still holding, still growing generally, I think they grew like 5% last year on average in the sustainability. I know it's very varied, but so I would say that that's a really, really good sign. Even in a bad market or worse market, we're seeing increases, we're seeing job flow, we're seeing people moving, and we're seeing salaries go up. We're seeing more jobs come in, and so I think I'm very optimistic coming into 2026, looking at that and looking at what we're doing currently and where, what's coming in just in the first few weeks of January, from our clients and what we're seeing. It's really promising.
do you feel that's really good, strong negotiating power for candidates then? Is it on salary? Or can you see candidates sort of negotiating aggressively in other ways?
It's a good question. I think all candidates can and should negotiate on salary. I think that is we can talk about lots of other things when we're talking about a package and when we're moving jobs, but the be all and end all is what you see on that paycheck that pays for groceries, heating, kids' clothes, etc. at the end of the month. That is the most important thing to a lot of people. Not all, but a lot of people. Now, not everyone is super greedy, but generally speaking, it's important. Money's really important, and living and being able to, go on a holiday a year and not worry at the end of the month is really important. So I would always suggest candidates should negotiate. I don't think they need to go in really harsh, but I think they can be honest about their situation. They should do their market research. What are other companies paying? What are we seeing? What trends are you seeing in your particular skill set? Can you put yourself in a situation where you have 2 or 3 opportunities? They don't even need to be offering you, but if you have 2 or 3 other opportunities, it gives you a bit more confidence with that negotiation, and you can push a little bit. I don't think people push companies enough. I think
it's funny you say that, Martin, because I'm sort of thinking jobs with impact and purpose are popular and people feel quite strongly about them. They're not doing them for the salary, so this isn't the sort of primary goal there.
Yeah.
There's a sense you almost sacrifice a salary in order to do something with purpose.
Yeah.
And that potentially even companies are sort of aligning themselves on that. So what you're saying contradicts my understanding of that.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right, but only in a specific subsector. So if you get someone that are working at NGOs, charities, those kind of organizations, those people are, the Puritans, in this market. And I speak to a lot of people that are on significant salaries that say, I would take a pay cut to work at an NGO or work with the UN or, work with charities. And I'm fine, and I'm happy to do that. But I also think people realize that, if you're doing sustainability for a large corporate, FMCG business, bank, although what you're doing is having a positive impact, I don't think there's any issue with saying I should be paid my fair share.
They would like to have, Martin, or they would like to have the company actually having into their value proposition something that also creates a positive impact. Let me pull out some stats here from LinkedIn. Okay, crunchy. Okay, so in 2025, the LinkedIn's 2025 stock take says green talents gets hired at a rate 46.6% above the overall hiring rate. This is global, okay? So it's not regional. So again, wow. 4 in 10 workers, so 43%, tells LinkedIn they would ideally like a job that contributes to the energy transitions or climate, which grows to 52% for millennials and 58% for Gen Z workers. 1 in 3 workers say they don't have the skills they need to get a job that contributes to the energy transitions or climate. And almost half say they aren't being given green training at work. These are huge numbers, huge opportunities as well.
Yeah. People should look at those kind of statistics. We started this conversation talking about money and think, there's clearly a huge demand. There is. And, market shifts are based on people's opinions and what sells. And if you're looking at hiring graduates, let's take sustainability and ESG specifics out of it completely. And 9 times out of 10, those graduates all want to understand if you have a social program, a D&I program, what you're doing to help the planet. And you're competing. And bear in mind, let's not be fooled. We are going to be competing with candidates as companies. I know every Daily Mail article will tell you that, there's no jobs for anyone or things like that. But the best candidates, if you want the best candidates in your company, and you're saying 60% of them are interested in sustainability and green programs, and you don't have any in that company, that's going to have an impact away from just sustainability and reporting. That's you not getting the best people for that reason. And so, I mean, that's the first time I've heard those statistics, and they are really interesting.
They are.
They don't add up, do they? There's a patchwork there of things that don't make sense. Huge number of jobs, a huge number of people that value those jobs, and yet not the training and not the skills that are necessarily on the front line there to be able to do them well. So a skills gap.
We tend to hear a regionalized narrative. Those are global numbers. So if you factor in just India inside, which they would like to have something that creates more impacts, because maybe there are lots of environmental issues, air quality, yada yada yada. Okay, so where the whole narrative around ESG and sustainability, it is still very actual. It is still very important for that profit meets purpose. Countries like the UK, Europe in general, not the US anymore, but at least UK and EU, we heard so much about it that it is kind of normal to be a little bit fed up with this, if it is the right word to use. So I do think those numbers actually make sense if we look at, we know Hong Kong, for example. Hong Kong ESG reporting is still very, very important, okay?
Yeah.
I don't know very well about the Indian market, but I know that there is a boom in renewables and climate techs in India that is absolutely extraordinary going on there. So when you factor those numbers, with it, I think it does make sense.
Yeah. The Middle East as well. The Middle East, with all their buildings, all their generation, they put sustainability first, at least on the surface. Everything they do has to be within various environmental guidelines. They see themselves in the future as, eco-tourists and, tourism when they wean themselves off oil. And so you see it in the Middle East. They're investing in solar, they're investing in wind, they're investing in hydro, they're investing in, Abu Dhabi just had a huge program for mangroves regeneration, for biodiversity, to stop coastlines eroding, because the beaches are important. I think so. It has it's important everywhere. And I think I don't think people should be fed up about it. I don't think it's been spoken about as much. People have been speaking about oil and gas prices and the price of, a barrel of oil, and what country invades another country for some reason for decades and decades. And we haven't, we haven't really spoken about ESG that much. So people, should start learning, start getting on board with it. We talk about no training in the world, but, Cambridge has some really good programs to look at sustainability leadership that people can do. People can invest their time and their money into retraining and upskilling, and it makes a difference.
That's a good leverage for them. It is a really good leverage for them. But I'm curious to know where, on the other side, where candidates are losing leverage. Is it more competition, more automation, more outsourcing, all the fractional roles that I keep seeing more and more around?
Yeah. Well, I know I talk a lot about reporting. I know I do, but I think that's the low-hanging fruit of the one that we can see might be affected by AI. Outsourcing reports, is something that could come and disrupt the market quite a bit. When we talk about reports and communications, even copywriting, we're seeing it, all the time when we talk about marketing comms for ESG, etc. However, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic about the parameters of AI and how much it can really affect. It's only as good as the things you put in. Data, stakeholder management. Talking and selling things to boards, getting those SMEs on site to say, listen, I know you need to do this one report, but hire me as a sustainability manager, and we can win some projects here, and we can do this, and I'll, all those things that people can do. That old saying of people buy from people, I think is going to always be really, really important. So, I think if you're only number crunching or, your accountancy for ESG, then, maybe you should upskill on kind of that stakeholder management, project management piece, running things. But, I am quite optimistic about it all. And I don't think we're going to see a huge wave of jobs going because of, AI. I think where one door closes, another door opens, and there's always opportunities. You just have to be flexible, retrain, not even retrain, just, I suppose, just portray yourself into the market as something slightly different than you were before. We've seen it last year when people got let go because of CSRD. They went into more project management. They went into more, they did more DE&I work. They did more social work. They went more on the comms side rather than the out and out sort of CSRD specialist reporting because they didn't need to do it. So we see examples of it all the time. And, I think it's really important that people understand that something is far in the distance not going to ruin everything. As long as you're prepared and, you can adapt yourself for what's coming, whatever that may be. And even if it's not bad, it could be really good, but just be prepared and be aware. And then you should be going into with optimism.
It's nice that you just name dropped the sustainability courses that, executive education sort of things that are available. The Cambridge one at the Institute for Sustainability Leadership, that's very much where I started my career, Martin. You might not know, I worked there for 12 years and we ran those programs, and it was a long time ago now, in all fairness, but we used to take really senior people from all different sectors, VP level and above in oil companies, in food companies, in technology companies, and effectively put them through a bit of a boot camp. And they would have a bit of a personal revelation about the state of the planet and ultimately what they, in their positions, in their companies, can do. So we were very pleased with ourselves. We thought we were building this army of change makers who were all completely connected and ingrained into these companies that is obviously going to, turn the ship and sort of, correct course, if you like, with so much of this, the world's companies. But they all left and became sustainability consultants and ultimately abandoned those ships and set off on their own small boats to do their thing.
Sounds familiar.
Talking about outsourcing and consultancy and those kind of other, what are the general trends on that these days as well?
Well, I always, whenever I'm talking to candidates, I always say things are cyclical. So 2 years ago, everything was in-house. All our client base was all big companies, small companies, looking at their own carbon footprints, building big teams and really investing. And then more recently, it's been much more on the consulting side. And what I mean by consulting is not individual consulting, as in like you're your own person going from one job to another. I mean more working for larger consultancies. The reason I differentiate that is because I still don't know how mature the market is for individual consultants. If we look at the tech market, for example, developers, there's contract developers everywhere. You come in, build a website or build a back-end system, 6 months, leave and go elsewhere. I don't think the market's quite mature enough for that just yet. There are some examples. I've been recently working with someone that is just turned herself into an individual contractor, and she's doing really well. But we're seeing a lot more projects coming in from consultancies. I think you have a bolstered up in-house team. You think we don't need to have that bolstered up in-house team anymore. Let's reduce it, and we can outsource it to a consultancy. So consultancy work goes up. And then, eventually they'll get bored of paying consulting fees and they'll build the in-house team. So, I'd always say it is cyclical between in-house and consultancy.
It does make sense, though. You also have to factor in that for any founder or CEO point of view, hiring today, in this particular cycle, feels risky, very risky. You have increasing tax, employment laws, and also like niche roles that, like you said, since we are in a cycling environment, roles that could be considered, let's say, risk in the long term. So you don't want to grow that asset in-house. It happened across different verticals.
Yeah.
When though, does it make sense from a company point of view, when does it actually create risks or hidden costs to outsource?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I know the answer, to be perfectly honest. I think it's going to depend on the company, the size of it, and when we're talking about, is it now, is it in 2027, 2028? Because risks are all about, I suppose, really the main risks that companies worry about are regulatory. That has a direct impact on them. Now, some great companies will think about risks that are kind of third party, environmental, etc. But it's a really difficult question to answer. If I'm perfect, I'm honest. It's that's what they hire sustainability managers for. To answer that question for them. That's probably the limit of my knowledge, is just finding those people for them. So yeah, it's a tough one, but I suppose there would be a line for each company to say, we now need to, this is essential, and whether they go and therefore invest in a specific person to deal with that, whether they outsource it, whether they bring someone in for 6 months, it's going to be so individual on each one. I'll bring us back to the guy I was talking to who had to hire a contractor for £1,000 to do the report on the birds nesting. That's on a very small scale. He wasn't willing to do anything, but then he had to, and that's the risk. If you don't do it, you get a big fine, and you might not be able to continue the building project. So they brought it in. So it's on a spectrum.
Look, let's stick for a second onto the risky part, which I think is not just for employees, but also for employers, which is AI. My view, it's always been the same, and I do understand the let's say the value into it, the efficiency that it brings.
Yeah.
But I do have kids, and it is a constant thought in the back of my mind. Politicians still have to understand Facebook. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
And the media, for once, I believe it is not doing a lot of fear-mongering about jobs disappearing. I actually do sense, I don't know if you share this feeling with me, but I actually do sense like a hushing around this topic compared to what they would normally do, make a big case around it, right?
Yeah.
So I do believe we haven't seen yet its impact. Your thoughts on AI replacing jobs?
I think in the short term, I can't see it happening, but I think it's silly to not believe that AI and its inevitability, it seems, is going to have an impact on us. All the heads of like Palantir and all these AI gurus have literally come out and said in plain English, AI is going to be the end of the world. And they're the ones running these companies. So, I think you're probably right. They're not doing enough fear mongering, and we're not doing enough prep. And we're waltzing into, we're giving it information willingly. We're just feeding data willingly. It's kind of like, when social media first came out, we didn't really know the impact. I don't think we still do, but and then we were just all waltzing in, giving Facebook all our data, doing those quizzes, and then Cambridge Analytica came in and rigged elections off the back of it. So it's and then we're like, oh, how did this happen?
Just resurfaced? Cambridge Analytica.
So I don't pretend to have a crystal ball. I just don't know. What I know for now is my impression of AI isn't. I'm not as wowed by it in a real world work setting as I say a lot of people. I think it helps people cut a lot of corners, and I think it's a really useful tool. I do think it may mean some reduction in teams, but as long as the economy is growing and more companies are coming up and there's more investment, etc., that shouldn't be an issue because it's just more smaller teams. I recently had if I talk about my industry, recruitment is constantly under threat of AI. I get emails every day about buying into AI recruitment tools. We scrape all the data, we message all the candidates, and I'm toying. I was thinking about it. We don't do that. We're a relationship-led business, and I got a message the other day off a large financial organization. Not to say who they are, but very
Mhm.
big. And it was a lovely message. And I went back and, I thought I was talking to the person. And within one email reply, I was speaking to an AI bot. Like, they were offering me a job. I said, no, thank you. But cheekily, I was like, I'll work with you though. And they were like,
Mm.
oh, yes, please. And I went back and forth a few times and I realized I was just giving them data. I wasn't getting any value out of it. I wasn't really engaging with anything. I couldn't talk to someone on the phone. And so, I think my industry more than ever, sales more than any other industry, is probably the one that people are saying is under threat. Real estate agents, recruiters, people that do
Consultants.
yeah,
Yeah.
consultants in general. But
Any kind of consultants.
my
Yeah. Accountants.
short-term impression of it is quite limited, and my long to short-term impression of it is I think people, are going to get sick of it. I think it's going to have to be so good for people not to be annoyed. Because I found myself being annoyed. I was like, I'm just giving you information here. You're just asking me and you've not engaged. You're meant to be asking me for help. Like, and now I'm helping you. And so I do think there are limitations, and I think there'll be value in people who can stand up and say, this is what we can do. I talked about it earlier from an ESG perspective. You know, if you think that people that do ESG reporting or people that work on social programs or D&I or even look at environmental management, if you think all they're doing is, assessing data and then making a decision, and they're not collecting that data, dealing with, stakeholders, dealing with finance that doesn't want to do anything, and managing projects and making sure they're delivered, calling up someone who's offshore in India to deal with if you don't think people aren't doing that, then I don't think you have a really good understanding of not just the ESG but jobs in general. Jobs, just people who do stuff. And so I'm quite optimistic. I don't think as much doom and gloom in the short term. I mean, we'll see what happens in 10 years. We could, there's a really good author called Yuval Noah Harari. He writes some amazing. If you read his book Homo Deus, so the one after Sapiens, Homo Deus, is basically talks about this, and it was written a few years ago. And he talks about basically people not having any work. Everything's just going to be, we're all just going to be kind of jobless consumers. Very interesting read if you have time. But yeah, I'm a bit more optimistic. I'd like to think anyway. I'd like, in the same way governments come in and regulate environment, we're not just chopping everything down like we were 60, 70, 80 years ago and burning things, willy-nilly and holes in the ozone. In the same way that they stepped in there, I think, we can empower, hopefully, people in charge, to step in and help. And
they're reactive, Martino. They're reactive. They seriously now started to understand Facebook. Now they start to put regulations for under 16s. Yeah. 25 years after. So that is the thing that scares me the most. It's not just politicians, it's also universities. What are they going to teach to kids? And more importantly, what are the kids going to do once they finish university?
Yeah.
So I read news about now any fresh graduate needs to send out 300-400 CVs before landing an interview, not the job, the interview.
Yeah.
So that is incredible numbers. Yeah. Now, besides sustainability, climate tech, energy will not. Okay, it is. Again, I'm not positive about this. So that's why I'm getting into welding.
No, I get that, but I graduated in 2011. 2011, I graduated, and then it was the financial crisis. No one could get a job. Everyone is, anyone who's a graduate is going to be jobless forever. And that just wasn't the case, And so I always think there's going to be some jobs. People might go into more blue collar. We talk about energy and renewables. My friend,
those colleges are packed. I was telling Emma earlier, packed, fully booked. For electricians, welding, like fully packed. It's amazing.
It's always going to be opportunity. And, if we talk about the environment, you want to have an impact. Okay, there may be an AI bot doing the report of the company, But do you know
Yeah.
what? You'll be able to find something where you can, start a program of work where, you're investing money into, sustainability programs across the world. You're convincing boards of doing that, or, you're helping a company transition into renewables. We're a country or a world of, production and, creating things, and AI is still going to need all that energy. It's still going to need people to input.
Yeah.
Without us, it's not really doing anything. So I am, I think we're all parents in this call. Me a bit newer, but I think we're all a bit worried about our kids and things like that. But we'll try and stay positive.
That's a good
Whether
approach.
university is going to be a lot of value for my 1-year-old son in 18, 17 years will be a question I'll ask at the time. But again, you just look at it. What's the situation? What's the best route for me? If I'm 18, 19, and I want to work in sustainability, great, go do an environmental course. Or if you don't want to pay for the university, go to these smaller courses, Cambridge, do internships. I see it I like it all the time on my LinkedIn page, because we don't do interns recruitment. We only do senior hires. People are hiring interns. People are looking for programs all the time. You just got to put in a bit of work and a bit of, and put yourself out there, connect with people who's looking for internships. If you don't get this one, you might get the next one. They might know someone who's looking, put a bit of elbow grease into it. And, at the very least, you'll get conversations with people in the market, with heads of sustainability, with people that run teams, that manage people, that, that do these projects. And, there's more options than people think.
It's a crucial thing you just say there about people, Martin. I think AI has the potential to unleash us from our computers and from our screens, and we will always be doing business with people. Youngsters will find their way, but to improve their people skills and to focus on the people that they know and the conversations that they can have is going to highlight opportunities for sure.
Yeah.
I'd like to wrap it up asking you, Martin, about what do you think is going to be 2026 regards of hiring. Put out that crystal ball that you say you don't have, about hiring, about salaries, and locations. Just a general overview. What do you think the market is going to be?
I mean, pinch of salt. I think you asked me this in 2024.
Of
course. And I said reporting, and that didn't turn out. So maybe I don't know everything, but I alluded to it earlier. I think things and assets are going to be is the big market trend. People want to see their return on investment, so we're going to see a lot of hiring in the built environment, construction, engineering, consultancy, and renewables. And don't just think if you're not an engineer, you can't work in these businesses and these companies. They take on lots of different people from lots of different spectrums of the sustainability market. And, I think early indicators, that's what we're seeing a lot of at the moment. And, geographies, we'll tip our hat to the Middle East. I think that is going to be, it is a booming market with all the caveats we said before. But I think the UK personally is going to be where you're going to get quicker wins. If you're on the market or looking or wanting to find a new job or have a good pay increase, you don't need to always look as a far. I think the UK market is going to be really buoyant. We've got lots of investment in the energy space, lots of investment in construction. I mean, you walk around London, there's building going everywhere. It's constantly, and there's new rail networks being announced, etc. So we're seeing growth, and I think the hangover of last year when we said a few people came onto the market, I think that's going to go, and salaries went up by 5%. I would like to see salaries go up by a lot more than inflation this year, and I think with the competition now that we're going to see, I'm seeing it now in the first 3 weeks of January. Candidates have 2-3 options that they're talking to. It's not like, oh, thank you so much for my job, Mr. Client. It's very much, okay, what can I get out of this? Is this the best opportunity for me? How is it going to shape my career? What can I give them, and what can they give me back? So we're going to see people with a lot more options, which, if you're bullish, you can utilize to increase your salary and give yourself a much better opportunity, which I think people should be doing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Martin. Always a pleasure to sit
Thank
down
you very
with you
much.
and have
Yeah, it was good.
this very broad but incredibly interesting conversations.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Martin.
I'll talk to you soon. Ciao. Thanks for listening to this episode of Raw Green. If you made it this far, you probably enjoyed it. So don't forget to hit subscribe and follow our podcast. It's an awesome way to support our community. At OBE, we're all about research, life cycle assessment, and the green tech innovation. Stay in touch through our socials or visit our website. Links are ready for you in the description. Catch you in the next episode. Ciao.